Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today. And thank you so much for all the love and encouragement shown until now. Today is episode 5 of season 1 of Live Chats at OBLC. And we are thrilled and amazed at all the love and support and encouragement we've been getting from the members, from the viewers, from the followers, and from the authors, especially. So, thank you so much, first of all, everybody, to encourage us for this little journey of Oman Book Lovers Club that we just started 8 months ago. The club started with a small idea to borrow, share, exchange books, and to be able to meet fellow book lovers in Oman who would share same interest and be able to make some friends. From then on, with the different ideas pouring in, the club has just evolved into so much more. And thank you to all the members, thank you to all the followers for supporting and bringing it to where it is. So, just a little introduction. If you are in Oman, join the book club on Facebook. If you want to meet fellow book lovers, talk about books, talk about the genres that interest you. This is episode 5. Tune into our previous episodes on YouTube and Facebook and on Instagram and like, follow, subscribe. So, coming to today's episode, we are talking to historical fiction author Louise Fein today. She lives in London. And a little bit of introduction of Louise right now. Louis was born and brought up near London. After a law degree at Southampton University, she worked in Hong Kong and Australia and enjoyed traveling the world before returning to London to settle down to a career in law and banking. She holds a master's degree in creative writing from St. Mary's University, London. Louis lives in the beautiful Surrey countryside with a husband, 3 children, and is a slave to her pets. Louis writes 20th century historical fiction based around unheard voices or from unusual perspectives. Her debut novel, People Like Us, is first published in 2020 into 13 territories. The book was shortlisted for the RSL Christopher Bland Prize 2021 and the RNA Historical Novel of the Year Award 2021. Louis' second novel, The Hidden Child, is a recent release and is the story of Edward and Eleanor, believers in the widely held pseudoscience of eugenics, who firmly believe in genetic superiority. Their world is shattered, however, when their young daughter, Mabel, develops debilitating seizures. Today, The Hidden Child is a bestseller in Canada. So get your copy. Go to www.louisfein.com to find out all the places that it's available. So let's bring Louis on now. Hi.
Hello. Hi, Anisha. Thank you for such a lovely introduction. And
Thank
thank
you
you
so
also,
much.
thank you for inviting me onto your lovely book club. I think what you're doing is amazing, and books just have this power to connect people. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Louis, for taking the time out. It's been such an honor and such a thrilling experience to be talking to you today. And for all the cooperative support you've been providing for the past few weeks, it's been such a lovely experience. So, without further ado, let's jump on into the chat. We will be talking a lot about your journey as an author, your books, and the person behind the author, and any other questions that may be coming in from the audience.
Sure.
All right. So I would like to request you to start with telling us about the kind of books you write, although I've covered very briefly in the introduction. But while we will talk in detail about each book during the course of the chat, but a brief introduction for people tuning in now. What are the kind of books that you write in your words?
Okay, so I am a historical fiction writer, but I tend to focus on more modern history. So the 20th century, and so far my books have been pre-World War II, but the book I'm currently writing is actually set in the 1960s. So I'm getting more and more up to date. So at some point I'd like to write something contemporary, but that's for the future. I really like to write about times of social change and big topics that are still relevant today, because history tends to repeat, and lots of things that have happened in the past. I think we can learn from, as long as we study history. I think it's so important. There's just so many untold stories. And when you learn history at school, you tend to learn about, the major historical events, but not about the sort of the day-to-day people, the social side of it. And that's what really interests me.
So, where did the inspiration come from to start writing this particular genre? Are these based on some real experiences by any chance?
Yeah, so my first book was actually in my head for about 10 years before I actually sat down to write it. And it's really inspired by my father's family, who came to England as refugees from Nazi Germany in the 1930s. My father, I'm actually the product of my father's second marriage. My mother was a lot younger than him, and he died when I was only 17, and he never spoke about his past. And I suppose it was traumatic, and it was a different part of his life, and he didn't really ever talk about it, and I never had a chance as an adult to ask him about it. So it was always something I was interested in exploring. But I didn't really know enough to make it a factual story, and I've always loved fiction. And so it was always, if I wrote about it, it was going to be some sort of fictional story. So then I began to research the subject in the area, because he was from a place called Leipzig in Germany, and I'd never been there. And so I did some research trips actually with my half sister, who was from his first marriage, and we got very, very close during this sort of research period of time. And she speaks German, I don't, and so she was really helpful to me. So it was kind of a lovely way of learning about my own past, but equally writing a fictional story. But everything that's in the book, all the incidences, the historical detail is accurate, or as accurate as I can get it.
Wonderful. So we'll talk a little bit more about your sister and family in the next segment. So when you also told me that you started writing even as a kid. So I would like you to share a little bit about the entire journey as an author, since when you started writing, whatever you didn't publish, and then what it takes really to become a published author. And I mean,
Yeah,
like when
yeah.
you try to take it up seriously as a serious book, rather than, because you've been writing since you were a kid. So just tell us more about the whole journey.
Sure. So, as a child, I mean, I loved books as soon as I could read, and we had something called a traveling library. So there was it was a big truck, and it used to drive around, and it was floor to ceiling books. And I can still remember the smell of the truck and the old books in the inside. And you used to go in, and the children's section was at the bottom, and I'd be allowed to choose a couple of books every week and take them home. And I just lost myself in this fictional world. I think I preferred the sort of the imaginary world to the real world. It was always much more exciting and interesting. And I remember as well that when I first started school, one thing we used to have to do was we had to write about what happened during our weekend on the Monday morning. It was, we had to write a little thing for the teacher. And, we were maybe 5 or 6 years old. And I used to make everything up because my weekends were really not very exciting. So it always usually involved buying a pony. So my teachers must have thought I had very wealthy parents that constantly bought me ponies, which was totally false. And yeah, I used to make up these sort of quite exciting things that happened at the weekend. And so that was really the first thing. And then when I was about 7, I used to write my own little books and staple them together. And I told everyone I was going to become an author when I grew up. Well, let's fast forward a little bit. And I realized that being an author was maybe not the most sensible career choice. And so I decided instead to become a lawyer. And the writing did take a bit of a backseat for a while, because I went into law and into banking, and obviously I got married and had a family, and my life was pretty full with all those things. But I still wrote something. I used to love writing. I wrote diaries. Every night before I went to bed, I would write something. And on the commute, I would write some poetry or short stories or ideas for novels. It was my way of sort of winding down on the train. And then when my youngest child was
But
2,
all this writing that you were doing all along, you never thought of publishing it. Didn't you ever put it on
no,
maybe a blog, or because that's
not
common.
at
That's
all.
that's something people start doing. They'll put it out somewhere.
Yeah, no, I didn't. I never thought it was any good. I had literally no confidence. I just wrote it really for me. I thought it was all pretty rubbish, and I just did it for myself. No confidence at all. And then when my youngest child turned 2, she became very ill, which is part of the inspiration for my second book. She had a severe form of epilepsy. And I felt I had to stop working to take care of her. But I also thought perhaps this was an opportunity to do some more writing, and wind on a little bit. But I then did enroll to do this master's, and I thought this was an opportunity to actually get this book that was in my head written. And yeah, it went from there. So I can tell you the publication journey, but maybe that's a little bit further on. I don't know.
I no, no, yes, definitely right now.
Okay.
So, yeah, the whole process, because that's something that a lot of our viewers have shown interest in, people who may be budding, aspiring authors. So,
Yes.
yes, you write, you write, you make a lot of effort to write down a story. So that is one part of it. Getting it
Yes.
published is a completely, entirely, altogether different thing. So,
It is.
yeah,
Yeah.
something,
And
yeah, we don't
yeah.
do here.
Yeah, and like a lot of people, I went into it with, as I said, very little confidence. I had no idea whether what I was writing was any good or not. And also, I didn't know anyone who was an author. I didn't know anyone in the publishing industry. I had no links at all. So I was kind of coming to it as a total novice, innocent person who knew nothing, which just goes to show it's possible for anyone. But what I really wanted from the course was to have the support of tutors, and it was great to get that feedback. I mean, you do not need to do a master's degree to become a writer. It helped me, but there's lots of writing courses. Any writing course or any sort of feedback you can get on what you're working on is helpful and can do the same thing. And so I started to get feedback, and it was quite positive. So I felt like I was going in the right direction. But by the time the master's course was finished, which it took a year, and I thought, oh, I can write a book in a year. But it was not at all finished. It was only about maybe halfway done. And so then I took about another year maybe to finish the book. And then in my ignorance, I thought it was finished. So I had the idea that I would send it out to agents. But of course, it wasn't good enough. So I got rejections, which is very normal. But I knew that it needed improving, but I didn't really know how. So I went to a literary consultant, and I got a report, an editorial report, which basically said that everything was wrong with it. But it did have potential to be good, but it needed work on, plot and characters and basically everything. So once I'd sort of peeled myself off the floor and thought, no, I do want to make this better, I then set about redrafting it, and lots and lots of redrafts, lots and lots of edits. And then after a couple more years of that, it was ready to send out again. And then I got some interest from agents. And literally, when you send to agents, I mean, they get hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and you sort of think, oh, I'm just going into this void and nobody's ever going to read it, and it goes on to what's called a slush pile of, you know, piles of people who've sent their submissions in, and you just think it's impossible. But I got picked off a slush pile. So my agent, who is now my agent, read my book, not knowing me or anything, and yeah, she loved it. So she read my book in the weekend, and then she became my agent, and then after that it gets sent out to publishers. But she kind of warned me, you know, it's very difficult. The market's not easy. It may not get picked up. So with each stage, you think, oh, this is it now. But it's not, because there's another sort of process to get through. And when it goes to publishers, what happens is it goes to an editor. And if the editor likes it, they then have to convince the rest of the publisher that they want it as well. So they go to something called an acquisitions meeting. They have to convince, you know, the sales team, everybody in the publisher that you know, they should buy this book. So I was lucky. I got an English publisher fairly quickly, and then my agent took it out to America, and then I got an American publisher as well. And then I got all these foreign translation deals, which was amazing. So yeah, it's been a total dream come true for me, and it can be for everyone, really. So the good thing about writing is that it's not limited to age or anything. You can be anywhere around the world, any age, and still, you know, write a book.
Yeah. So I forgot something I was about to write. 13 territories. How many languages are your books published in?
Yeah, so that's about 11 foreign languages. So it's not out in all of them yet. The latest one it just came out in was Greek, which was in, I think, October. So it's slowly coming out in lots of different places, but it's in Russian. It's coming out in Brazil next, I think. It's been amazing, and so hearing from readers all around the world is so lovely. And that's when I say, you know, books connect people. It's true. It's a total, you know, we're all human, and that's what I love about it.
Yeah. And the first one, you just talked about the latest one, but the first book, how many languages is that published in?
Yeah, no, so that is the one that's published. It's still coming out, because it only first published here in 2020, and then you know, I think also the pandemic slowed things down, so publishers put their schedules back. So some of them are only just publishing it now, and the second one at the moment it's just in English, but it's going to be published in some other languages. Probably next year. So at the moment there's 4, but that might go up, hopefully.
Yeah,
but we'll see.
So the books got published back to back in 2020 and 2021, but the first one you wrote about 4 or 5 years ago. And when did you write the second one?
Yeah, so the first one, so it takes time from the time you get a publishing deal. So I got my publishing deal in January 2019, but the book didn't come out until sort of May 2020. And then the second one I had to write really quickly because I had a deadline that time. So the first one took about 5 years from the time I started to the time it got published. The second one was about 18 months.
So you actually started writing the second book after getting the publishing deal for the first one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. And actually not straight away either, because what happens when you get a publisher is you then have to do more editing. So I did probably another sort of 6 months of editing before I started the next book. Yeah.
We have a question there, but we will take that up during the chat. So Great. I mean, that's really interesting to hear about your journey. And I will talk a little bit more about the book one and book two and the subject when we go more deep into the individual book. But now, having understood your publishing journey and the little bit about your books, I would like you to tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are in person, the person behind the author. Tell us a little bit about your life.
Okay, as I say, I started life as a lawyer, and then I went into banking, and I was writing is really far from the sort of the corporate world. So I think I also kept it a little bit quiet what I was doing, because I think people would have thought, oh yeah, she's writing a book, what an idiot sort of thing. But yeah, when I got my book deal, all my friends and family and everything were really, really happy for me. But were living more in London, but then we moved out into the country, really because of my youngest daughter, who'd been poorly, and she needed to go to sort of a particular school, really. So we moved out for her. And I've always considered myself to be quite a city person, because I like pavements and streetlights and going to the theatre and cultural things. So, when we first moved into the country, it was like, oh, it's a bit dark at night, and there's lots of mud around and things. So that was a bit of a shock, but I love it now. I absolutely love it. It's really peaceful, and actually we're not that far out of London, so it's just a train ride into town. So yeah, I love going to the theatre. I love music. I love, seeing friends. And my books, as you said, are quite serious, but I'm quite a fun person. And
Yeah.
yeah.
That's what we wrote yesterday, that while the books are quite serious, the person behind the books is not a serious person at all. She's quite fun. We
Yeah,
can talk about that.
I don't know why I write serious books, but I do. Anyway.
But yeah, I mean, the interesting part is the stories that you tell are stories that no history teaches. So it's really,
Yeah.
really, in fact, while listening to the book, I was so transported back into time. I had to really shake myself out of that whole, you know, backdrop to come back
Ah,
into the real life. So that's very powerful. I mean, I would say, especially I am not very used to audiobooks. So when you're listening to an audiobook, it's kind of you're not creating the picture yourself. The audio is doing that for you.
yes. Yeah,
So it's, I think,
that's
more
true.
impactful. Yeah, the audiobook is really good
Okay.
quality, I would say. Yeah.
I haven't listened to the audio book yet, so I
No,
don't
but the
know what it's
narrators are
like.
really good.
Oh,
The
good.
the
Yeah.
even the diction, I think, really resembles, I'm assuming, the language back in time. So it's actually very powerful.
Oh, good, good. That's nice to hear. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so what kind of books do you like to read? I know you read a lot. I've been following your Instagram, and you keep posting reviews of fellow authors a lot very regularly. So, what are the kind of books that you like to read? And do you think that your writing does take some inspiration from what you read?
Um, well, definitely. I think the most important thing, if you're a writer, is to be a reader first, because you just have to. I mean, you absorb so much about
Yeah.
writing without realizing it from reading. And I've always read really widely, so I read lots of genres. I go through phases a little bit, but I love crime and thriller, but I also love literary fiction, sort of book club fiction. I like books that make you think, which is probably more the type of book that I write. So I would say that's my favorite type of book. In terms of authors that have influenced me, my top favorite authors really are. I love Kate Atkinson. I don't know if you've come across her books, but she's written books like Life After Life, Behind the Scenes at the Museum. But she's written kind of literary fiction, but also she writes crime novels as well. So she writes across genres, which I would love to be able to do that. But yeah, so she's amazing. I also love Khaled Hosseini's books. He wrote The Kite Runner, Thousand Splendid Suns. I like books that take you places and times that I've never experienced. So things that make me learn about the world. I also love sort of classic books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Small Island by Andrea Levy. I've got so many authors that I love. My current favourite author is Anthony Doerr, who wrote All the Light We Cannot See, and his latest book is Cloud Cuckoo Land, which is just amazing. So I there's lots of authors. I could talk all day, so I'll stop there.
Okay. So let's now dive into your books. That's the right time now. So let's talk about The Hidden Child. What is, tell us about the inspiration. Of course, we've talked very briefly during the chat, but let's dive deeper into it. The inspiration, the how did the story come to life?
Yeah.
Do you think any characters are inspired by your surroundings, or do you think any character takes after you, or any inspiration from people close to you? And
Sure.
yeah.
Okay, just very briefly, I'll just do a quick synopsis of the story in case people missed the beginning. But the story is about a couple, Edward and Eleanor, who live in 1928-29 London. They're quite wealthy. They're sort of, but they're more sort of middle class, up and coming. They're not aristocracy, which is what Edward would really like to be. And they have quite what seems to the outside to be quite a perfect life. Edward's got a name in education and psychology, and his wife used to work for him. That's how they met. He's a war hero, and they have a beautiful little girl, a lovely house in the country, a flat in London. They're doing pretty well. But then, and they're both supporters of the eugenics movement, which, for people who may be less familiar with the term, it was the concept that human intelligence was very much inherited, and that certain races and certain classes of people were more superior to others. And the idea was you could breed out characteristics and certain diseases that we didn't want to have in the population, a bit like they breed sort of farm animals in that sort of sense. And of course, it totally doesn't work. It's ridiculous. There is no such, thing. But then the Nazis took this idea and took it to its extreme, as we all know, in Nazi Germany. But it's very not written about in terms of it being a popular concept in England and in America. The Americans went even further than the British did with it, and actually it was all around the world. So it's sort of now not talked about because of what happened with the Nazis. Anyway, so Edward and Eleanor are supporters of this movement, and then they have a child who has epilepsy, and epilepsy is one of the things they thought they could eliminate with selective breeding. So yeah, it's quite heavy topics, but there are sort of lighter moments in the book. And it's really what happens to the child and to them and their relationship. And as things start to fall apart in their relationship, all these secrets start to be revealed about Edward and his background. And it's also a little bit about, how women's position in society, and how Eleanor took a bit of control over her life and her child's life. So
even the parallel story about the sister is very interesting. It covers very different elements about the societal beliefs at that time.
Well, I mean, England is still unfortunately quite class-based, but very much so in the 1920s. And there's a lot of and that comes into the book quite a lot, with this idea of, certain classes. Well, the richer people thinking they're better than the poor people, and that sort of thing. But yes, so you asked about
It's
the
not just
inspiration.
England. I think it's not just England. It's everywhere. I mean, rich or poor or certain professions or
Yes,
the other. It's
it's
just as much as we try, it's kind of built into the system, and it really have to make
yeah,
conscious effort to do away with it. So it's not
yes,
just England.
yes.
It is
No,
subject.
it's true, but it's interesting because in America, and I'm not saying America are perfect at all, but if you're sort of new money, if you've worked your way up from nothing and you've made lots of money, people admire that. In England, at that time I'm talking about, they didn't admire people who moved up the class scale. They wanted to keep it as it was. So
Hmm.
the sort of the upper classes or the professional classes felt very threatened by the
Hmm.
idea that people who were working class might possibly get more money and be as equally as powerful as them. And also, if we remember at that time, the Russian Revolution, the whole communist
Hmm.
revolution wasn't very long ago. So the sort of the upper classes were feeling quite threatened. So
Yeah,
that's sort of a background to it. But
I
you're
get it.
right; it's a universal thing.
Yeah.
And in terms of inspiration, obviously my own daughter being affected by epilepsy sort of inspired the book. But she's doing amazingly. She has no seizures. She hasn't had a seizure actually since she was 3, and she's doing very well. She's a teenager now. But
Wow.
had she been born 100 years ago, she would have been institutionalized and her outcome would have been very different. So that was really what I was sort of exploring in the book.
Yeah.
And you asked about the characters as well.
Yeah.
So Edward is actually based on a real person. I've changed his name because I have given him a backstory which the real person behind him didn't have. But the real person behind Edward is someone called Sir Cyril Burt, who was an educator and psychologist. And
Okay.
he started the whole grammar school system. Well, there was a grammar school system, but he brought the grammar school system into existence in the UK, whereby the brighter children would go to a grammar school and the less bright children would go to what was called secondary modern schools. And they would not have a chance to go to university. They would sort of be channeled into doing the sort of manual labour jobs, unlike the children that went to grammar school. And his idea was that the grammar school kids would come from the middle and the upper classes because they were the
Right.
more intelligent. And he was given a knighthood and everything for his work. But actually, after he died, they discovered that he had probably falsified a lot of his research to
Ah.
get the results that he wanted, and he's been quite discredited, and that system doesn't exist in the UK anymore. So
Hmm.
but a lot of children's
This is
outcomes.
exactly what Edward was doing at the beginning of the story.
Yes, exactly. So he that concept was based on a real person.
Hmm.
Eleanor is totally fictional. Mabel is fictional, and
You don't
uh,
think Eleanor's personality takes after you in any way?
not really. I mean, Eleanor's experience of the seizures
Hmm.
was probably based on my experience of seeing my daughter have her seizures. But no, because I would see myself more as a sort of mixture, perhaps, between Eleanor and Rose. I don't know.
Ah,
I don't know.
right. Interesting.
I don't think I would have sat back and let but I live in a different time, so it's kind of hard to say. It's
Yeah.
she had to be a product of her time, whereas I would not have let my husband put my child in an institution. But that's now, not then. So
True. No, yeah, not exactly about the actions she took, but about her general day-to-day, personality is what I meant. Anyway, so let's talk about the previous book briefly. People Like Us. Tell us about it, and we've already spoken about the experience of publishing it, but if you could briefly talk to us about the story.
Yeah, so People Like Us is set in, as I said, 1930s Leipzig. And it tells the story of Hetty. It's just her story. And she is brainwashed into Nazism. So she grows up the daughter of an SS officer. And at the time, Hitler really targeted the young people because he knew that he could get them to be on his side. So she really believes she's got a role to play in this wonderful new 1,000-year Reich. But then she encounters the previous best friend of her older brother, a chap called Walter, who happens to be Jewish. And so winding back, sorry, I should not explain this very well, but winding back, her brother and him had been inseparable best friends when they were little, but then the brother had to cast him aside because he was Jewish, so he sort of cast him aside. And then Hetty meets him, and basically they're a lot older, they're teenagers, and they begin to meet regularly, and they sort of fall in love. And it's really through Walter that she begins to see the bad side of what Hitler's regime was doing. And obviously, over the period of time, the book's set between 1933 and 1939, just before the war breaks out. We see the increasing sort of terror, and what the Nazis were doing becomes much more violent. So the tension sort of increases throughout the book, and it's really what happens, how she has to sort of decide between her family and Walter, and what they're going to do. Yes.
Right.
So.
Very intense. Again, of course, both the books are quite intense. So for
Yes.
serious reading.
Yes.
So
They are.
let's talk about a little bit about your writing process, inspiration in general. You've told us about the journey, of
Mm-hmm.
course, different pieces. You have told us about the inspiration as well. But in general, and we will come up to what next in the next question. But in general, if you could tell us about your whole writing process, why did you choose this particular genre to write against anything else? Because you've been writing since a child. You wrote about buying ponies. So uh, there could have been different stories that you wanted to tell, but why did you choose this,
Yeah, I
as
think,
a theme?
well, because I didn't know very much about the industry. What I hadn't realized when you sell your first book is then there's an expectation that you will
Yeah,
continue to write in a particular genre. So if your first book is a crime novel, then you will be kind of expected to continue writing crime novels. You won't sort of go crime and then drama or comedy or something. I mean, people do write different things, but often under different names, because readers sort of expect to say a similar sort of book from you.
yeah,
So I think the fact that my first book was a historical fiction novel, and I love historical fiction, so that's fine, is why I started writing historical fiction. But do I want to write other things in the future? Yes, absolutely. But I think my books will always be sort of theme based. They'll always be, books that make you think, or are good for discussion, because that's what I love to read, and that's what I can only write that. I'm not going to start writing comedy because I just don't think I'd be any good at it at all. So, so you have to kind of write what you enjoy and what works for you. So yes, but hopefully I will at some point write something more contemporary.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, talking more about the writing process,
Mm.
tell us a little bit more about how you develop the characters in each story. Of course, there was a slight inspiration from real events, but then you have to take the real events and then create another story completely fictional. So, tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about how the story comes to you. How do you create the story? How do you develop the characters and also the research bit? We talked about it before.
Mm.
So I
Yes.
think that would be very interesting. The
Yes.
characters development, how does the story take shape in your head, and the
Yeah.
research.
Yeah, sure. So Anisha, I would love to tell you that it's all really straightforward and to, give you a little point plan of to how I do it. But the truth is, it's quite painful.
I can
so,
imagine.
ba- so basically, I always start with a theme. Like for instance, with the hidden child, it was sort of going to be based around eugenics. I find the right time period that it sort of suits, and then I have usually a vague idea of a beginning and a vague idea of how it ends, but absolutely no idea what happens in the middle. And I have tried to plan my books, but it never works. It just never works. So basically, I have a little bit of an idea of a couple of characters, and then I just start writing, which means that my first draft is awful. It's terrible. It's like a complete mess that I couldn't show anybody, and it's sort of it's almost like a half draft, half notes, basically. But it's the only way I seem to be able to work. So it's that first draft. I find my characters and I find my story, and then with that, once I've got that, which is basically the nuts and bolts of it, I then completely ditch it and start another draft, and then that becomes the better version.
Yeah.
And I mean, I will have done some general research around the topics and the time period. So I will read fiction that's usually written at the time, so contemporaneous fiction written then, non-fiction, just bits and pieces on the internet. But when I'm and then I write the second draft, which is a better version of the first draft, but it's not anywhere near finished. So often I still have, I'm getting a better version of the story and a better version of the characters, but I'll have lots of gaps and I'll have bits that say, research this in more detail. And then when I come to write my third draft, which is hopefully the draft that will be the sort of final one before I send it off to my agent, at that point I take much more time over it, and I really then research, drill into the little areas that really need more detailed research, and I'm much more efficient with my research now. So I do some general, and then I do those specific things, and then I'll edit. I'll edit to make the writing better, to make the cut out things I don't need. And I do a bit of planning between the sort of the second and third draft, so that I really have a good structure then. But it is a process. It's a messy process, and I'm not saying anyone should do it my way because it's probably really inefficient. But it works for me. So yeah, that's sort of my very messy process.
While listening to you, a thought came to my mind. When we read books or even when we watch maybe a series or, in fact, not movies, but series, yeah. But with books and with series, I experience, and a lot of people talk about it, that they get attached and they don't want it to end. So with most very effective and powerful books, you want to know what happens, and yet you slow down towards the end because you don't want it to end, because it has become a part of your life. It has become
Yeah,
a part of the way you're living through it mentally through your day.
yeah,
And once it ends, it will cease. That experience will stop happening. So you get
yes,
attached basically, and you don't want it to
yeah,
end. Now,
yes,
listening to you, the way you deep dive into the subject, you're rewriting and rereading, which is again quite painful. You obviously would go deep into the characters and start living that life.
Mm.
Then how is it when the process ends and you have to move to the next book? And I think more so in case of your kind of books, which are very heavy in terms of content and subject. How is it difficult to detach yourself and move on and come back to your normal life, or do you just get used to it so it's not
Uh,
difficult anymore?
Actually, not at all, because in all honesty, by the time I finished a book, and by the time I've edited and re-edited and then done all the publisher's edits and read, I will have read each book, tens and tens of times. So, maybe 30, 40 times. I am sick of my books by the time I've finished the process, because I could almost tell you word for word what they say. So and by then as well, I am itching to get on with the next book, because it's already playing in my mind. I already, I have an idea now for my fourth book, and at the point where it's at the ideas stage, it's amazing and it's shiny and it's new, and I want to get started on the new one. So no, I don't have trouble letting go. But then when I come back to them, I'm much more fond of them, because I haven't read it for a while, and they become like my, they go from being toddlers I'm fed up with to being nice children that I like again. So
It's a
that's
very
sort of
good
that.
analogy. Every mother will be able to relate to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. At this point, I'll go back and take a question that we had. Out of your published books, which one is your favorite? That's a very tricky one.
Oh,
Asking a mother which child is your favorite.
that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, it's like picking your favorite child.
You
I
don't have to
don't
answer
think
if
I
you
can
don't
do
want
that.
to.
I don't think I can do that. I would like to say that my favorite book is the next one I'm going to write, because at the moment it's
Ah,
flawless.
that will bring
And
us
then
to
when
the
you
next
start
question.
writing it, it becomes all flawed and imperfect. So yeah, so it's
So
my next book. That's my favorite.
before it becomes imperfect, let me just keep
Exactly. Yeah, it's
giving
the
it
one
my
I've
love.
not written yet.
Very smart answer. So coming to the interesting question, what's next? What can we look forward to?
Okay, so the book I'm currently writing, which is not my favorite anymore, that's that's now become imperfect. Is, yeah, as I say, it's set in. I can't tell you too much about it, but it's set in the early 1960s, and it's the story of a girl, a sort of a young woman, who is just on the brink of sort of setting out on her life. And then she discovers a secret about herself, which sends her on a totally different path. And it's really about the situation of women in society's sort of unspoken expectations of what a woman should be, what a mother should be, what an older woman should be, and what happens if they don't comply with those sort of unspoken rules. And I've set it specifically in the early 1960s, because it was a time again of great change, particularly for women. And so, yeah, that's the basic story. Well, it's not a story. I
Interesting.
haven't told you the story. It's the theme. Yeah.
Like you said, you're moving from early 20th century to middle of 20th century. So I think the
Yes.
next one would maybe the 80s and 90s, and then someday in the current time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, the weird thing is that historical fiction is in some people or institutions regard it as anything more than 30 years ago. So, the 1990s, which, I remember, doesn't feel like historical fiction, but some people regard that as historical fiction. So yeah,
True.
I can go quite modern.
Actually, when you even if you write it now, maybe 10, 20, 30 years later, it will become historical
Well,
fiction.
yes,
So
exactly. Yeah. Well, even yesterday's historical, isn't it? So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
So I would like to come to some fun facts that we shared yesterday on our one of our posts, and maybe we can talk about one or two of them, the backstory.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
So let's talk about your house. Dewey lives in a very old house, which was once a water mill with a
Mm.
stream running under the house and some
Yes.
occasional guests showing up.
Yes. Yeah, it's yeah, so it was a mill, so it dates back to like the late 1500s, so it's 500 years old, in parts. It's a bit of a mixture. And yeah, we still got the old mill, the workings inside the middle of the house. It's
Wow.
very unusual. People come to the house and they're like, whoa, this is different. And yeah, we still got the water underneath. And at certain times of the year, we get a fair number of sort of frogs or toads, I'm not sure which, that we get the little tiny baby ones that we have a pond, and they come from the pond and they seem to be on a mission to go from the pond to our next door neighbor's house, when our house is in the middle of where they're going, so they come under the doors, and we find these tiny little frogs, so we have to kind of take them out. But yeah, so it's interesting, but yeah, we love it. It's different.
England has a lot of these houses which are ancient and just being refurbished and not been broken down. So that's wonderful
Yeah.
part of living almost in history. So
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
nothing quite works very well, but anyway.
Once had lunch at Buckingham Palace. Let's
I
hear
did.
about
I did, but it was a charity lunch. I wasn't invited by the Queen or anything, so it's not that exciting. But no, I did go to this charity lunch at Buckingham Palace, and I arrived at Waterloo, which is the main station we go into London, and I got into a taxi, and I said, Buckingham Palace, please. And he was like, oh, ha, 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 like this. I was like, no, really, look, here's my invitation. So yeah, the taxi driver didn't believe me, but I obviously don't look the sort to go having lunch at Buckingham Palace. But yes, that was quite exciting.
Interesting, very interesting. And the one I would like to talk. So yeah, hates heights and would not do a bungee or parachute even if someone offered her millions of dollars.
Mm-mm.
Same.
No chance.
Let's talk a little bit about your first book when you were 7 years old, and it was all about ponies.
I don't have it anymore.
Oh,
I don't know what
it was
happened
a
to it.
story or was it a book? Like a book, a
Oh
long
no,
story?
no, it was just no, it was just a handwritten little, handwritten thing that I stapled together on,
Oh, so you
paper.
created a book. So it was a longish
Yes.
story. It was not just a
Yeah,
story.
no, I don't even think it was probably that long, and it certainly wasn't very good. But I just stapled all the pages together, and yeah. But
It's an
everything when I
inspiration.
was 7 was about ponies.
That's, so yeah, I mean now there are new characters around ponies. So I think that's an inspiration for all the little girls watching this. And I'm going to
Yes.
inspire mine too. Come on, let's get writing.
Yeah, well, actually, in the Hidden Child, in this one, I have got a pony in here.
Ooh,
There is
ooh.
there's a pony in it. It doesn't have a major role, but there is a pony in it. So there you go.
So your childhood dream is kind of
Yes,
imbibed into the book.
exactly, yeah.
And the last one, and very relevant to our chat, dreams to have one day your own library with library room with floor to ceiling bookshelves on every wall. Ooh, a dream house.
Yes, I would love that. I know I've made it look like this, but this is just 2 bookcases shoved together, and it doesn't go any further than that. So, but
So the
I've
whole
made it look
room will
like,
look like this in
yeah,
your dream.
yes, exactly. That's what I
I
would love.
really
But
wish your dream comes true very, very soon.
thank you, thank you. I'll let you know. I'll give you a little video tour when I get one.
Great. I think I am at the end of my questions, Louis. If there's anything else that you would like to add.
I'd just like to say thank you so much for inviting me on, and you've been absolutely a joy to work with and to chat to. And I wish you every success with your book club, and just everyone out there listening, just keep reading and loving and sharing a love for books.
Thank you so much. So, for our viewers, if you want to buy her books, simplest thing to do is go to her website, louisfein.com, which is where you'll get all the relevant links to Amazon and all other sources to get the books. Um, it's been wonderful talking to you, Louis. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And thank you, everybody who's watching, who will be watching later. Thank you for encouraging this initiative. And please tune into the next episode where we will talk to debutant author Anandita Das from India, who's risen to fame for her iconic, humorous, and insightful memoir, What the Pandemic Learned from Me. So it's in the form of letters she has written to the pandemic about all the topics which actually happened to people during this experience. So coming up Saturday next week, December 11th at 4 p.m. And a prologue to same will be on Instagram Live as usual a couple of days before. So thank you all again. Good night and good day to people in London. Wishing you a nice day. Thank you so much,
Okay.
Louis. Thanks again. Bye bye.
Bye.